So now that I have the basic landscape established, the next thing I want to do is I want to start to add just some really simple water to the equation, just to give this island environment a little bit of context. I also want to start to add some lights. Once we wrap up the basic lighting and some of the environment decisions that we're going to make, we're going to introduce a first-person camera so that we can actually walk around our landscape and get a sense of the size and the scale and you know, how easily it is to move from one part of our landscape to the next. So the first thing that I want to do is just introduce some really simple water. And for this presentation, we're going to focus on some of the standard assets that come bundled with Unity. So I'm just going to focus on my project panel for a moment. I'm going to move this window over just a bit. So I'm moving my asset view over with this vertical rule. And I'm going to focus inside my assets, inside my standard assets. If I reveal the standard assets, you can see that these are all of the components or all the packages that we imported when we initially created our project. Now, if you're missing some of these, you can always add these by going to the Assets menu, Import Package, and you can see that all of the packages that are default with Unity are available here. So if you're missing something that I reference in this presentation, just make sure that you go up to Assets, Import Package, and choose the package that we're going to access. So the first thing that I want to do is look inside the Asset folder, inside Standard Assets. Way down at the bottom there's Water Basic. And so the idea here is I'm going to select the Content folder, not the Source folder, but the actual Content folder. And once I select the Content folder, I can look in the Assets window and I get some thumbnails for two different kinds of water. The first one is Daylight Simple or Nighttime Simple. And the basic difference here is just the color of the water. So I think I'm going to experiment with making, I'll start with a daytime scene first. So I'll just click and drag and drop the water into the equation. Now when I do that, you see that we get a little disk of water here. It's very small. And when I drag that in, by default it's selected. So I'm going to focus on the inspector panel, and inside the transform position, I'm going to take a look at the scale. Currently the scale at X and Z is set to 16, and I want to make that a lot bigger. So I could manually scale this with the scale tool. I prefer to use the inspector editor here, or the inspector panel, and I'm just going to key in a value of about 2000 to get started. I'll probably make this bigger later, but 2000 will give me a sense of the environment. So the minute I make those two values 2000, you can see that I've flooded my environment and I get a better sense of the topology that I've created. Now I can move the water up or down, and I just want to move it up so that I don't see the square of the terrain object. So I'm going to move that up, and that looks pretty good. So now I have some simple water inside the scene. In addition to that, I want to start to introduce some lights. Lights are pretty simple to get started with, and we can spend a lot of time experimenting with them. There's only a couple of lights inside Unity, and I can find those under Game Object, Create Other, and the top half of the list I have my direction light, a point light, a spotlight, and an area light. For the sake of this demo, we're going to focus on just directional light and point light. I'll start with a point light, and a point light is just like a light bulb. We can think of this kind of like a light bulb. It's a single point in space. The light has a fall off to it, or an area of effect, and we can see that in this range indicator here. Okay. Now I'm not really lighting my environment. That's because my point light is so far away from my island. It's just kind of floating off in space, and the range of the light is not influencing my landscape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this widget, and I'm going to take advantage of the widget by looking down the y-axis. And I'll zoom out, and you can see that my light is just kind of floating way out in space, or way out over the water, over the ocean. So I'm just going to back this way off, and I'm going to move this to a position where it's certainly over top of the island. I'll take a look at it from the side view as well, and it's just way too high up in the sky to influence the ground, so I'll move that down just a little bit. And now I'm going to either use the range field in the inspector editor, or I'm going to use this interactive feature here that allows me to dynamically adjust the range. Let's try that again. I just lost it. Point light. I should be able to, if I can get a little bit closer, I should be able to grab one of these control points. There we go. And introduce the range. As I make this range much larger, or I make that light closer to the ground, you can see it starts to light the ground. Now this is a point light, so it's restricted to a specific area. The light has a range to it, and outside of that range, that light is not going to affect the landscape. An alternative style of light, if I go up under the game object, create other, I could introduce something like a directional light. Now, a directional light is something like the ambient light in the environment, the sun, the moon, something that is a light source that could be interpreted as being infinitely far away. It doesn't matter the position of the directional light, but the direction with which it's pointing in is the thing that we need to be concerned about. So with that directional light selected, I'm just going to influence these rotation fields, and as I do that, you can see that it's modifying the direction of the light. Okay? With each one of these lights, we have things that we can adjust, like intensity, so we can bump up the intensity or down the intensity. We can control the color with this color swatch, and I have this color picker here. So I can gain a lot of control over my environment by introducing some simple lights. And now that I have lights inside the equation, you can see that my landscape looks a little bit more interesting than it was when I started. So I have some basic water in the equation. I have a directional light. I have a point light. And the point light is really being overwhelmed at this point by my directional light. And that's okay. I just want to experiment with these, and maybe I'll just add a really intense color to my point light to see how that affects a very specific area. And I might use this point light to really create some special effects. When I start working on my second project, or project 2, I might use some point lights to start to define my volcano. Maybe I'll have some flickering lights to help suggest the volcano eruption at some point. So I really just want to familiarize myself with the capabilities of these lights. Now, some of the features that come with the lights are pro features. So things like drawing lens flares, things like real-time shadows. We're not going to have those capabilities unless you have access to the pro version. So I'm using the free version, so I don't have access to that. So I have my water, my lights in the equation. The next thing I want to do is I want to introduce a first-person controller, or a first-person camera, that will allow us to walk around our environment and explore it. But we'll do that in the next presentation.